Welcome to the District Court Show. This is a production of the 10th Judicial District. I'm Judge Steve Halsey from Wright County, chambered in Buffalo. My co-host is Judge Elizabeth Strand, also chambered in Buffalo. We're going to be talking about cameras in the courtroom, and Beth is going to introduce our guest.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome Beau Berentson. Beau is presently the Director of Communications and Public Affairs at the Minnesota Judicial Branch. And Beau, you've been doing that since May of 2014. Correct. Now, prior to that, your work history includes being the Director of Communications and Media Relations at the Minnesota State Senate. Is that true?
That's true.
Also, the policy analyst and lobbyist for the Association of Minnesota Counties. Well-rounded resume.
That's right.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Judge.
As Judge Halsey mentioned, this show is about media in the courtroom. Now, there's been a change in the law recently about district court judges, and we'll get to that, but the cameras have been allowed in the courtrooms at the Minnesota Supreme Court and Minnesota Court of Appeals, right?
That's correct, yep.
And how long has that been in place? Do you know?
Well, for quite a while. The current rules have been in place since 2011, but there are rules that far predate that, 10, 15, 20 years previous to that. And essentially what the rule is at the state's appellate courts, the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals, is that media are allowed in to record those proceedings as long as they provide 24 hours notice. Now, if there are multiple outlets that want to come in at the same time, we'll ask them to pool their feeds, so just one camera appears in the courtroom, but as long as they provide the notice, they're allowed in.
Okay. And aren't some of those proceedings available to view online?
That's correct. We also have a partnership with Twin Cities Public Television, where they record each of our Supreme Court oral arguments and post them on their website, usually by 5 p.m. the day they happen.
Okay. Recently I was watching, I think it was one of the local news shows, and there was a story about this, something was coming before the Supreme Court, and they showed some file footage, and here comes walking in Chief Justice Magnuson, who hasn't been the Chief Justice for, what, 3 years or something like that?
That's about right.
So I thought that was not very timely. We're going to show there, I'm going to show right now, traditionally the only pictures that you would have seen of things going on in the courtroom were from court artists. And the one that QCTV is going to show right now is a depiction of a witness testifying in a murder trial in 1987. I believe it was in Sherburne County. So things have come a long way since then, particularly as to the size of cameras, and I know for years that, one of the criticisms was, well, it would be very intrusive with these huge cameras and lights in the courtroom. Maybe at this time, Beau, you could tell our viewers about what is the current status of the law. Let's start first with in civil cases.
That's right. So Minnesota for many years had a rule in district court cases where cameras could be allowed. And when I say cameras, I should be more broadly. Recording equipment, audio, video, still cameras, could be brought into a district court case if the media requesting the access could get the judge and both parties, the defense and the prosecutor, to agree. As you can imagine, it's hard enough to get a prosecutor and defense attorney to agree on much in a court case, and it very rarely happened. It was essentially serving as a de facto ban on cameras in district court cases. The media in 2007 filed a petition with the state Supreme Court asking the Supreme Court to look at softening those rules to allow more access. And it led to a pilot in district courts that eventually became adopted as a permanent rule, where in civil cases, you no longer needed all three sides of the judge and the two parties of the case to agree. You only needed the judge's consent. With that change, it did add an additional element of coverage to civil cases, but not a tremendous amount. Civil cases you typically have the media interests that our criminal cases do. But that being said, there were some examples of some pretty interesting camera coverage in civil cases. There was a case in St. Cloud related to public entities' hiring practices, where the local media outlet came in there and had a digital camera in their courtroom throughout the proceedings of the trial, and led to some very interesting coverage. But the rule had been maintained in criminal cases, where again you needed the judge and both sides of the case to agree, until the Supreme Court this past August issued an order that started a pilot. The pilot began this past November, and the pilot pertains to criminal proceedings that happen after a guilty plea is either entered or the defendant is found guilty of his crimes. So typically what we're talking about here are sentencing hearings, where the media can come in and bring their camera in these sentencing hearings or these post-guilty plea hearings. And as long as the judge doesn't find good cause to keep them out, the media is allowed to come in and film.
Moving back to the civil cases, the camera can sit in for the entire case, for instance, and film any part of the case.
Well, the rules have some protections where they don't want members of the jury filmed. A judge can always issue a specific order limiting coverage to only certain parts of the trial. So there's a lot of control maintained by the judge to make sure that only elements of the trial that they deem appropriate to be recorded are recorded. But again, all parts of the trial would be accurate. That like I said, this example I used in St. Cloud, the media were there virtually every day of the trial, recording portions, at least portions of the hearings.
And which cases, I'm just looking at the rule, there are some cases that are automatically prohibited from cameras being in the courtroom.
That's correct. And the criminal pilot you're referring to? Exactly.
Side, yeah.
In the criminal pilot, you can't have cameras in cases that involve criminal sexual conduct, cases that involve domestic violence, juvenile proceedings, and they're also excluded from our what we call our drug courts or our problem-solving courts, drug courts, DUI courts, et cetera.
Okay. And in those proceedings, there needs to be input, in fact, consent, I believe in writing, from the victim that they are willing to be on camera.
That's exactly right. And in addition to that, a judge will oftentimes issue, assuming they don't find good cause to prohibit the camera coverage, a judge may issue an order instructing the media to turn off their camera at certain times, not to film members perhaps of the public that have come to attend the hearing. So again, there's a lot of discretion on the part of the judge to determine what's appropriate for the camera to film in the proceedings.
But at the appellate court level, the cameras can be there the entire time. So why the difference between district court and the appellate court?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think it's for folks that may not be too familiar with the differing practices between our appellate courts, that's our Supreme Court and our Court of Appeals, and our district courts. I think there's an important distinction. In a district court, it's a lot of times what you kind of view a court proceeding to be in a television or a movie program where you've got the judge and a jury and witnesses and evidence. An appellate court case is a lot more technical. You typically only have presentations from each of the attorneys representing both parties. And instead of looking at specific evidence and crime scene photos and hearing from victims and witnesses, what you're really hearing is a discussion about finer points of the law. And that, I think, is why you saw much earlier adoption of cameras in the courtroom in the appellate courts as compared to the district court, where you're dealing with people, and especially in a criminal case, people who have been victims of perhaps terrible crimes or witnesses to some pretty ugly situations, where you want to be more sensitive about what coverage is shown in the media.
In the recent murder trial involving the two young men that got in a scuffle, it was in Taylor's Falls, where they were both fishing, and then the one came to the other side of the river and stabbed the other one to death and went to trial, I believe in Wisconsin. And I saw footage of the verdict being read, and it was very surprising to me that the camera panned over and showed the reactions of the family. And I can imagine that's precisely what the family didn't want, or certainly the judge probably didn't want.
And again, that I think points to, so in the Supreme Court's order authorizing this new pilot for criminal district court cases, it doesn't specify, outside of making sure there's written agreement for victims to be filmed, it doesn't necessarily specify if spectators can be filmed, if family members can be filmed, et cetera. That's really been left up to the individual judges in individual cases to make those distinctions or set those ground rules with the media. So as our office in State Court Administration and the Court Information Office, which I work in, what we do is, as these requests come in, is we reach out to court administration, the judge, the interested members of the media, and make sure that everyone's very clear on the ground rules. And what we've also learned just in the few short months that this pilot's been going on is we learned an early lesson where it was difficult for members of the audience or folks who might be in the courtroom that day for a whole entire different case that might be heard later that day to know when the camera's on, when the camera's off. It might have been made clear from the judge to the media. Other folks weren't quite sure and made them uncomfortable. They weren't expecting a camera in the courtroom that day, as it's not been Minnesota's practice for decades. So what we've really begun doing is trying to have the judge make some comments to the participants in the courtroom that day about what to expect, what's been authorized. We've even gone so far at the judge's request to create little signage that we'll put on the camera that lets folks know when it's turned on, when it's turned off, just so everyone's familiar with what the rules are.
Okay.
And when you mentioned camera, there's also audio equipment that can be used. But are you talking about the old-fashioned big cameras? Or can people come in and use one cell phone? Or what's been used thus far?
Well, I mean, our existing rules outside of the pilot would bar any sort of recording device, whether it be an audio device, whether it be using your iPhone, whether it be using any sort of technical equipment to record the proceedings. What the pilot authorizes is essentially any audio and video device. So this has been used for, just in the pilot the last few months, radio stations wanting to get audio of a sentencing hearing, local newspaper wanting to take still photographs during the hearing, and then of course TV stations wanting to video record. And again, the equipment varies of all sizes. Cameras are much smaller today than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
And you talked about pooling. So if it's a bigger camera, the media will agree to one camera placement, one camera being used?
Yep, and that points to, again, the judge's discretion in these matters. If we have, let's say, 3 TV outlets that want to film the same hearing, it might be a situation where the courtroom's large enough to accommodate 3 television cameras. It might be that the judge asks them to pool. And by pool, we mean one camera would be in the courtroom recording, and then by an agreement, all the media members that had submitted a request to record that hearing would share that video or that still image or that audio recording after the hearing is done, and they can all use it equally.
What's been the practice as far as giving, kind of the rules or directions as far as what you can and cannot, that you can't show the faces of the jurors, for example? Yeah. Is the judge doing that? Are you doing that? Somebody else?
So the authority rests in the judge to make those decisions about what should and shouldn't be filmed in their courtroom. It's then our job, again, with state court administration, to help that communication between the judge and the media members. And the media has been extremely respectful of the judge's orders. The media is very vested in making sure this is a successful pilot, and they've been great partners in this pilot.
We're going to take a 2-minute break for some public service announcements, and we will be right back.
The next 30 seconds can save you a lot of money. Just do your laundry in cold and stick to full loads. Auto-sleep your computers. Plug your gadgets in a power strip and switch it off when you're done. Headed out? Turn back your thermostat by 10 degrees. And drive sensibly. The more energy you save, the more money you save. Find other great tips at energysaver.gov.
Me and my boy Matt had it good. He had catnip that was off the hook. But one day, he brings a girl home, and she's allergic to cats. Every sneeze was a nail in my coffin. Now I'm in a shelter. It's decent, but they don't even have Wi-Fi.
The average text takes your eyes off the road for nearly 5 seconds.
People think I'm trash, but they're wrong. Today I'm just an aluminum can, but one day I could be a stadium.
Wake the sun, tell him that I've begun to dream of things to come, and tell the trees not to look for me. I'm going to find some peace of mind. Wake the sun, wake the sun, wake the sun, wake the sun.
Sure, I look cute now, but when my owner lost his job, it was rough. I was living on the street, and one night, me and this Cocker Spaniel got into it so bad, I wound up looking like an ice cream cone. I cried a little bit, but thankfully I got rescued, so I'm running, I'm jumping, all back to my old self. And I'm ready to give unconditional love, even if you put a lampshade on my head.
They're coming. Places, everybody.
Light check. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Everything looks good on our end.
And lights.
Come alive with the forest. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
Welcome back to the District Court Show. I'm Judge Steve Halsey from Wright County, and my co-host is Judge Elizabeth Strand, and Beau Berentson from State Court Administration is here talking about cameras in the courtroom, so we'll get back to that topic. Do you have some statistics about how many hearings there have been recorded since the pilot started?
I do, and again, the pilot started in November 10th of last year. In that time, we've had 33 requests from the media to have, and they've all been in sentencing hearings, to have audio or video coverage. Mm-hmm. Those 33 requests came in 20 cases. Obviously, several cases had multiple media entities interested. Of those 20 cases, coverage was allowed in 9. 7 times coverage was denied for a variety of reasons, and then we have 4 cases that are still pending.
Okay. What remedy, if any, does the media have if their request is turned down?
To be quite honest with you, there's not a great appeals process for the media. The rules lay some pretty specific rules for appeals, but they typically need to come from parties in the case, not necessarily the media. Mm-hmm. I think the media's biggest influence in this will be as the Supreme Court evaluates this pilot and gets feedback from everybody involved, to provide their feedback as the Supreme Court decides what the next phase of either making these rules permanent, continuing the pilot, or discontinuing it will be.
Have most of the requests been from media within the Twin Cities, or?
You know, surprisingly, well, maybe not surprisingly, but it's been all over the state. Of those 9 hearings, I spoke to Hennepin and Ramsey. Certainly probably had the most interest, as you would expect. Mm-hmm. They have the largest number of case filings, but we've had hearings covered in Benton County, Rice County, Dakota County, and up in Duluth and Virginia, Minnesota as well.
Okay.
Do all recordings have to go through your office before they are aired on TV or on the radio?
No, the requests to cover, we get copied in on those requests, so we're aware. We do not view the footage or listen to any audio before the media uses it. No.
So they take it and go and,
exactly.
and put it on the air as they see fit.
Correct.
There's been, I have a blog called Jurors Behaving Badly, and kind of keeping track around the country, and there's all kinds of crazy things that have been going on with social media and jurors. But one issue that's been coming up a few times is that the media has been in during a jury trial and maybe even mistakenly has shown the jurors. Mm-hmm. And there have been motions for mistrials, and some trials have had to stop after several days, and basically a mistrial ordered and started over. Have there been any close calls or anything like that in any of these hearings?
No, and again, we're talking about with the pilot, we're talking about situations where the jury's typically not present in the sentencing hearings. Yeah. Exactly. So that necessarily hasn't been a situation. You know, we've had some issues where I think early on in the pilot, as we were kind of learning our lessons about what to expect, judges weren't issuing orders specific to what the camera could cover as far as other courtroom participants. And there you have the situation where the camera pans and maybe shows families' faces, victims' faces, folks in the audience, not necessarily identifying them as family or victims, but capturing them, which I think judges are now more typically addressing in the orders they provide to the media.
Does this order follow folks into the hallways and outside of the courtroom too?
Well, it varies somewhat from courthouse to courthouse. Most courthouses in the state have pretty strict existing rules about where cameras can and can't go in the courthouse. So typically the media will take a camera off into the courtroom, turn it on for the portions of the proceedings. They're able to record, turn it off, and then remove the camera. We really haven't had a situation where the camera's dragged through the halls of the courtroom. Certainly once you leave the courthouse facility, the media is free to be recording wherever they'd like. And that's where you often see victims or family members or witnesses being interviewed by the media outside the courthouse. It's fairly common.
The murder trial up in Little Falls was kind of sensational, and there was a lot of media coverage of that. How is your office involved? My understanding is on a daily basis with press releases and telling the media what's likely to happen that day. Talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. That's one of the things in our office, in the Court Information Office, that we're really proud of in our work, and we think it's a pretty good public value, pretty good public service, and that's being kind of a conduit between the media and the court in these high-profile cases where there might be interest both with statewide media as well as national media. Might be focused in on a Minnesota District Court proceeding, whether it's the case you mentioned or other high-profile cases. And really what we do is do everything in our power to make sure the judges, the attorneys, the court staff in the courthouse can focus on the administration of justice, while at the same time making sure that our media partners have all the information they need, are kept up to date, kept up to speed to make sure that they can accurately cover the trial for the public. So when we either are approached by a judge or a court staff that there's a lot of media interest being generated in a case, or when we can tell through media coverage what cases are drawing a lot of attention, we'll reach out to the district court judge and the court administration and talk to them about some of the strategies we developed over the years about trying to help the media and help the court staff in these situations. That's dealing with camera requests, as we've been discussing today. That can be providing daily updates to the media to make sure they've got a sense of what might happen in the courtroom that day. If media come in with requests to view evidence displayed at the trial, we can help facilitate that. Again, there's a great interest to make sure that the media have that access so they can properly inform the public. But at the same time, we don't want that to become a distraction for judges and court staff, and that's where our office comes in to kind of be that conduit.
Right. I had mentioned off camera that previously I'd met quite often with your predecessor, John Kostouris, and he had expressed frustration with a lot of the younger reporters that they weren't actually getting it accurately what was going on in court proceedings. Has that been your experience? I mean, do you ever have to call up a young reporter and say, "No, wait a minute, you don't understand the process, and this is the process"?
You know, I can sympathize with the media because I don't have a law degree either, so a lot of this becomes new for me, which is actually helpful because then I can kind of see it through the eyes of someone who hasn't had the benefit of years of legal training to understand the technical terms, the process that are used in court proceedings. So that is an important role for our office, and it's not to chastise anybody for a mistake that anybody could make. These are very complicated matters. Judges and attorneys spend a long time learning these things. Right, a journalism school doesn't necessarily prepare you for that. So our job really is to, again, educate and inform, to make sure that if there's a misunderstanding about something that happened in court that day, to talk to the reporter directly, bring it up with them, help them understand, share with them elements of the public court record to help them better understand and better tell the story. And at the end of the day, just make sure the public gets a fair representation of what's happening in their court system.
How many of you are there? Are you the only one that handles all of these requests in the state?
We've got a good team. So there's, I have 3 folks that serve with me in my office. And then there's a public affairs person at Hennepin County District Court. Just given the sheer volume of cases that come in through Hennepin County, there's a lot of media requests, and she helps handle those as well.
And does Hennepin County have its own set of rules? I noticed online there was something special to click into, and I didn't do that. But.
No, that's simply because they have their own dedicated public affairs person. We ask if the media is interested in covering a hearing in Hennepin County in Minneapolis, that they also work with her as well.
And do you ever travel to any of the courthouses and watch the media just for being part of this pilot, or?
You know what? I haven't had the opportunity. One of the staff members I mentioned is available for any court that wants a little help on the ground as these camera requests come in. Again, we've only been doing this for a few months. This is very new for Minnesota District Courts, and we just want to be a resource to help make sure that it's smooth both for the court and for the media trying to inform the public.
Are you also involved with when the Supreme Court goes to hear arguments at different towns? We had the great pleasure of having the Supreme Court come out to Buffalo High School in May of 2009, and that was a very interesting process. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we call it the Supreme Court Traveling Oral Arguments Program, and to be honest, it's the best part of my job.
Yeah.
I love working with that program. So it happens twice a year, where the Supreme Court will actually take a road show, go out to a high school. In the spring, it's here in the metro area. In the fall, it's somewhere out in greater Minnesota. And what they do is they pick a high school, and they try to strategically go around the state to make sure that they're visiting different communities. And they actually go into a high school auditorium or gymnasium, and right there have a real live court proceeding in front of 500, 600, 700, 1,000 high school students who get the opportunity to watch the court in action. It's the only time the court ever hears that case. It's the real oral argument on that case. And the students get an opportunity to witness it and then spend 20, 30 minutes doing a Q&A, question and answer, with the justices on the Supreme Court. And then the Supreme Court justices spend the afternoon classroom to classroom, meeting students, interacting with them. It's a great thing to be a part of. We're going to be in Lakeville late April. Early April, April 7th. We'll be down at Lakeville North High School, and then we'll pick another location in greater Minnesota for this fall.
And a lot of, I understand the rural areas, I mean, it's like a community event. They have a dinner.
That's right, yeah.
It's
The night
quite a deal.
The night before, we have an open to the public community dinner, get hundreds of folks from the community, just a chance to engage them. You know, as our Chief Justice, Lori Gilday, says, the justice system belongs to the people. And it's one of the huge elements of my job and my office's job is to help educate, inform, and engage the public about their justice system.
Okay.
Now, this two-year pilot project ends about January of 2018.
So the Supreme Court's asked one of their advisory committees, one of these committees that helps develop the rules that our court system operates under, they've asked them to produce a report by January 1st, 2018, and to tell the court how the pilot's going. So that's going to involve kind of the number crunching, some of those numbers we were talking about before, how many cases, how many accepted, how many denied. But there's also a survey component in here where as these cases are as cameras are in the courtroom that day, we're handing out a paper survey to everyone in the courtroom that day, from the judge to court staff to the attorneys to the parties to people in attendance and to the media members, and asking them to tell us, did you think this was, what were your feelings about the cameras in the courtroom? Do you feel it impacted the administration of justice in any way? Any improvements you'd suggest? And it'll be gathering all that information, the empirical data and the opinions from those in the courtroom that'll help guide the report that's ultimately presented to the Supreme Court.
Has there been any issue, I know there has been other parts of the country, about what is the media? I mean, because you can set up a blog and say, you know, I've got this website for, you know, Judicial, whatever, in Minnesota, and I want to come record court proceedings. Has that been an issue at all with people that are just basically, you know, in the basement doing media?
You know, I would say so far through our pilot, that hasn't been an issue, in that simply all the requests that have come in have been from very traditional media outlets, the local newspaper, television station, radio station. But I do think that's a question that probably will get addressed at some point by a judge, probably facing a fairly tough decision about how to rule on something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't seen a sketch artist in the courtroom, I don't think ever. Are they still allowed in the courtroom? Can they still sketch victims' faces?
You know, it's something that I've been around for 2 years, and I think I've only seen 1 or 2 times a courtroom sketch. It's pretty rare these days.
Though we did see the really, really bad one of Tom Brady
That's correct. Yeah,
last year that was all over the media because it didn't look at all like him.
It did not.
Given the high side, we're almost done. I want to thank Beau Berentson for very interesting information regarding cameras in the courtroom. If you viewers have any questions about this topic, or there's other topics that you're interested in, you can send me an email. They will be showing my email address during the credits. So thank you for watching the District Court Show, and we'll see you again next time.